we welcome in a South African wine icon, somebody who knows not just wine fantastically, but Mr. Duimpie Bayly. A very warm welcome. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you.
This is going to determine whether they sleep well for the next month or not, Davey. What are your thoughts on this wine?
I think this is beautiful. Just if you roll it around, look at the beautiful color there that it has. There's no browning. It's got a lovely garnet sort of red color. Very nice. And then when you swirl it with you know that you get all different kinds of fruit flavors there. Some red fruits and some dried fruits coming through here. And obviously this wine has been in wood for some time, since say maybe 2 years in wood, before in small French oak barrels. And after that it came out of there and then was bottled. But you know, wines, most people underestimate the value of bottle aging. Not aging in the barrel, bottle aging. And so with time and a couple of more years of bottle aging, I think this is going to be a superb wine. This will put Paris to shame.
If you can hear some childlike squeals of delight in the background, that would be Jacques and Stefan, who've just had the kind of endorsement every winemaker dreams of. Duimpie likes your wine. That is particularly good news. Debbie, thank you so much. A little bit of history and a great assessment is much appreciated. And we look forward to finishing the bottle with you and maybe one or two more.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to share a bench with you. You know, I'm coming off the bench and I'm a impact player, I think.
And a fabulous impact indeed. Duimpie Bayly joining us. I only ever had the chance to meet Duimpie Bayly once, and it was that particular occasion at a Boschendal launch organised by Emile Joubert a little earlier on this year. And yet in just that half an hour or so that we sat and chatted, he had such a profound impact and made such an impression. I felt like we'd known each other for years. And I think that was the impact Duimpie Bayly had on most, if not all, people he met. Just such a gentle, smiling, happy man who was such an important part of the South African wine industry. A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, and welcome to an event that has a tinge of sadness to it, but I'd like to think we'll also have an air of celebration to it, because this evening, surrounded by some close friends and admirers of the great man, we pay tribute to Duimpie Bayly, who sadly said goodbye to us just a few weeks ago, but left behind such an immense legacy that I fear the hour or so we have will barely touch on the justice one would need to do to fully capture the magnitude of his contribution to South African wine, not just from a knowledge perspective and experience perspective, but simply because of how he changed and helped and influenced people's lives in the world of wine. And I think we'll get more than a sense of that during the course of this evening. So thank you for joining us on Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay, and welcome not to Duimpie in person, although I think he's probably here in spirit with a glass in hand and those eyes twinkling as they always seem to do. But we do have with us 5 people who knew Duimpie particularly well, as friends, as colleagues, as members of the wine industry, and now today as people who join me over a glass of wine to look back at this quite remarkable life. So in no particular order, very, very warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, some old friends and some are on the show for the very first time, to Beyers Truter, a warm welcome, Emile Joubert, to Neil Ellis, to DeWet, Viljoen, and a denim shirt-clad Kevin Arnold. There are not many people over the age of 25 who can pull that off. Kevin Arnold. Guys, welcome. Lovely to see you all. Admittedly, in slightly bittersweet circumstances, but I'm so glad you were all able to come in to join me and to tell people who've maybe heard a little bit about this great man, Duimpie Bayly, but don't really know much about him, just why he is and continues to be such an important part of our wine world. And Emile, if I can ask you to set the scene for us. You read a beautiful piece on Wine Goggle after Duimpie left us, just capturing the essence of the man. For somebody who doesn't know Duimpie Bayly, and think, well, why is Dan doing a whole show about this man? Give us an indication. Why was Duimpie Bayly so important to South African wine? Who was he?
Well, good evening, Dan, and thank you very much for this tribute. I think Duimpie, for people not involved in the wine industry, I start off by saying when I grew up, my mother was editor of the wine magazine Wynboer in the late 70s, early 80s, and the name Duimpie always popped up in our house as one of the icons of the South African wine industry. I mean, the names Duimpie Bayly and Ronnie Melk, they were mentioned in the same breath, and they both worked with Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, where Duimpie was production head at that time in the late 70s, early 80s. So the first time I heard about Duimpie Bayly was in a wine sense. My parents talking about wine with their friends, and Duimpie did this and Duimpie said that. And going through the publications and the magazines, I just had this he had this reverence that he passed down on a young guy like myself who wasn't in the wine industry at the time at all. I just knew if you're talking about wine, if you're talking about rugby at that time, it was like Morne du Plessis. And if it came to wine, it was Duimpie Bayly. So that's the way I saw it. And as I've said, to put into context, Stellenbosch Farmers Winery at the time, 70s, 80s, which Duimpie's, he headed up the head production. That was a major house of wine brands, iconic wine brands. Some of them still around today. But Stellenbosch Farmers Winery was a wine institution. Now, my friends on the panel might be able to add with that. But I mean, Stellenbosch Farmers Winery was the home of wine. Everybody who worked there was immersed in wine and the wine culture. It was led by a guy called Ronnie Melk, who said we must take the cobwebs off wine and make wine part of the fabric of South Africa. And Ronnie was that go-to guy. I mean, Ronnie Melk appointed Duimpie Bayly to work at Farmers Winery after Duimpie had just been playing golf, studying science, and drinking a lot of wine. I mean, Duimpie proudly told me that he was asked to leave the residence at university because of the repeated use of strong drink. So that was Duimpie. He was an academic and he was a scholar, but he had a great sense of fun. And his path collided with Ronnie Melk and helped head up this institution known as Stellenbosch Farmers Winery. So that absolute reverence he had on, I'm sure, Kevin and Neil and DeWet as well for his knowledge as a wine person. But that spilled over into Duimpie becoming actually the godfather figurehead, as far as I'm concerned, of the South African wine industry in the past 20 years. Since leaving Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, which had then become Distel, Duimpie was on every board you can mention. He was a sage of advice. He was a friend on all aspects of the wine industry. He was there to advise. He was there to comment. He was there to help you. Me as a wine writer and as a marketing consultant, if I wanted to find what the blend of Chateau Libertas was in 1969, he would wrap it off from the side of his head. And he was everything you wanted a wine person to be. Duimpie always said that this thing about wine being made in the vineyards is nonsense because he's never seen a horse win the Durban July without a jockey. So wine needs a human element. As far as I'm concerned, looking on the outside, I might be more attuned with the romantic aspects of wine. I see wine associated with people, associated with culture, associated with personalities. And there Duimpie was the person. One side was his immense knowledge, and he really had an encyclopedic knowledge on wine, viticulture, enology. He studied science at Stellenbosch University. He went on to study Davis in California. So I mean, that part was covered in those early advertisements in the magazines. You'd see Duimpie in a white coat and a glass of wine. He was a scientist. But on the other side, he had a way of communicating and talking about wine, getting that cobwebs of wine, talking about wine and his people. And with that, I think one of his greatest contributions was that he had such an immense love and respect for what people today are doing in the wine industry. The wine industry can be very divisive. We tend to knock regions and knock personalities and knock competitions and knock people propagating certain great cultivars amongst the other. Duimpie just had the most love and respect for every single aspect of the South African wine industry. If we ever had one true South African wine ambassador, it would really be Duimpie Bayly. And it's really an immense loss. And I think we're only going to feel the loss of Duimpie in the months to come and the years to come. I think a large part of the fabric of wine South Africa has been ripped out. And I do not know how we're going to replace it, not in my lifetime anyway.
What we can take solace in, though, is that there are still people like yourself, Emile, who are able to pass on the memories, pass on the knowledge. And we've got some others who can do something very similar. Beyers, tell us about your memories of Duimpie when you first crossed paths and what he meant to you as a friend and a colleague.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for doing the show. And to talk about Duimpie is so easy. I mean, there's such a lot of immense moments with him. But what I remember the first time I met Duimpie, and I know Duimpie now for 40 years, and I was playing for rugby for Gardens, and I was 2 years in Gardens, and can't believe that I played first team for Gardens. And when I came here, always if you played for another club, they take you into the other club like Van der Stel easily. And after my first game, I walked off, and that was in 81 when I started at Kanonkop. I walked off the field. There was two gentlemen next to the field that congratulated me on my game. I thought I played not a good game. I played a very average game, but the two guys was Duimpie Bayly and Ronnie Melk, and they said, "Son, welcome into Stellenbosch. You played a nice game, and welcome into the wine industry." And that's my first endeavor with a guy called Duimpie Bayly. And since then, I had the privilege. He's been on the Pinotage Association's executive committee since the inauguration in 1995, and I saw Duimpie at least 3 times a month. The week that he died, the Monday, we had a video sort of shoot with him, and I still had it on my desk the Monday when I came in. Duimpie and yourself have to talk about legends in the wine industry. I mean, Duimpie is a legend, but the two of us had to talk about legends in the wine industry. Duimpie for me, I always introduced him as in the wildlife you get the big 5, but in the wine industry we had the big 6. We had Pinotage, Cabernet Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, Chenin Blanc, and we had Duimpie Bayly. And then he would have a small smile at the side of his face. He always had that mischief smile. He was a mischief guy also. And Duimpie would always afterwards call me near and say, "You must stop that nonsense now, Beyers. You shouldn't talk like that." But Duimpie, he weren't only a profound interest in Pinotage. Duimpie was in love with the South African wine industry, but not the South African wine industry on its own. He was in love with people of the industry. He could talk to anybody. Doesn't matter race, color, whoever it was, and he always left something of himself in the people, and that you can see. Anybody that you talk to have got the story about Duimpie, the youngest person in the industry to the oldest in the industry, and he always left some of his knowledge of wine or viticulture, or he left something of his humor, or he left something of his passion of life with the persons that he were talking to. Duimpie, for me, surely Duimpie was not only a profound Pinotage man. Duimpie for me was Mr. Wine South Africa, and we will miss him. And like been said by Emile, I don't think there will be anybody, and I hope there will be, but I don't think in the next 2-3 years there will be somebody that will take over the role that Duimpie has played in the industry. There's lots of stories we can talk about Duimpie, but the other guys also maybe want to say something, and I whilst I'm sitting here, I'm having a glass of Pinot Noir, Cinsault, and Pinotage, the mother, the father, and the son, because Duimpie loved Pinotage so much, and he's done such a lot for Pinotage. He always wanted Pinotage to be the premium variety in a certain sense. We have to premiumize Pinotage, and he always said, Beyers, we don't need bulk wine in South Africa. South Africa make such good wines that everything should be bottled. Until the end, he was battling for that. So then, in short, that's what I want to say about Duimpie.
The fondness that everybody seems to have had for Duimpie shining through there. Thank you, Beyers. What I'd like to move on to as we look at this history of Duimpie, we've actually got a few comments coming in. I can see there, Jolene Janssen van Rensburg, what a legend, Duimpie. Well, Jolene, I think our guests already have made clear their views there. And Sue Wardrop, he was an awesome person and we so missed, can't believe we won't see him again. Memories keep on going. Neil, perhaps I can ask you to jump in here. We had some great recollection there from Beyers. What for you was the lasting legacy of Duimpie Bayly? What was the role he played in your life?
Well, I'd just like to thank my friends because I think they've virtually said everything. There's not much left. But no, look, I mean, Duimpie is one of those people that, you know, if you studied viticulture and enology, you knew of him before you even knew your professor's name. So, I mean, he had infiltrated in a positive way into so many avenues and corridors of learning of the institutions, be it research, and in his own kind of way, I mean, was responsible for funding so many products. And I mean, obviously he had a backer like Ronnie Melk. So if there was a shortage of cash or somebody needed a car, it would come from SFW. But having said that, you know, when in the sort of mid-80s, we were a tremendously over-regulated industry. And I mean, that only sort of eased itself not too long ago. But what I had in mind in my own venture, I could never, ever, ever have achieved without his positive insights, his help. Because, you know, what I had in mind, I had to move grapes over boundaries, and that wasn't permitted. So it was with his backing and his positive attitude towards wine. And obviously he could also, I think he had the tremendous foresight to see where this thing could possibly go. So, I mean, in that respect, I'm so indebted and so grateful for his help. But, you know, outside of that, once you got to know Francis Carl Bayly, you were able to get a lot closer to the individual. And I mean, he allowed a lot of people to become very, very close. And I was very fortunate to be one of them. And I enjoyed the privilege of lots of not only domestic but overseas travel, where Duimpie was part and parcel of the trip or the tour. But then, you know, he was just such a regular guy who had a profound influence on everybody he met. It doesn't matter who you were, what you were. I think you left his presence a much richer person. And I mean, this has been echoed by my friends who've spoken before me. But, you know, one can go on, and I mean, I could tell you 100 stories about Duimpie. But and the mischief that we got up to, and that was part of who he was. You know, I mean, we both had our knees replaced on the same day, shared the same room. But, you know, to just show you what just a wonderful person he was. You know, the last time he'd been in hospital was when he was in standard 3 in Burgersdorp. He'd broken an arm, and Duimpie in 2010 still believed hospital that the nurses were blonde-haired with mini dresses and big boobs. So, but I mean, obviously he was in for a bit of a shock. But we had a wonderful time because, you know, lying in hospital, you're not sick when you're having a knee replacement. And needless to say, our surgeon told us that, you know, if you're used to having a drink, please carry on with your normal way of life. Hospital won't supply. You bring it with. But I'm not going to carry on any further because I'd either be advertising for one of the hospital groups or put in jail. So, but yes, I think so much has been said by the previous guys that it'd be very difficult to repeat that.
I love the fact, Neil, that both yourself and Beyers, I can actually see the stories playing out. You both, there's so many stories I could tell, and then I can see the mental process, which is which ones can I tell without still getting myself into trouble. Yes, so we'll give you a moment to pare those down, because I do want to come back to you all and get your favorite Duimpie Bayly story, of which there seem to be so many. Kevin Arnold, we chatted when I was down in the Cape a little while ago about Duimpie. I know he had a huge influence on you as well. Give us your take on this quite extraordinary man who seems to, in his own quiet, smiling, mischievous way, delivered just so much to South African wine.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think, and more importantly, thank you for hosting this event to honor a guy, the likes of Duimpie Bayly. I'll start off by saying Duimpie was given the name at boarding school because he was the smallest guy in the class. And Duimpie went from being Duimpie in junior school, in boarding school in Bloemfontein, to becoming the biggest guy in the wine world, not only South Africa, but everywhere. This is a man of all seasons, a man for all people. What an amazing guy. I think as much has been said by the guys, Emile, Beyers, and Neil, and DeWet still to come. But he changed people's lives. I think he's the epitome of somebody who embraced his trade with a passion beyond all boundaries. He touched not only the juniors in the business, as Beyers said, but he went on to influence everybody. So an industry like the wine industry is made up of many, many aspects. It starts on the land, it goes into production, it goes into sales, marketing, and then it goes to whatever goes beyond that. And it's the only man in the wine business in the world that I've met that embraced every single aspect. So I think to pay tribute to Duimpie, one is humbled by being able to say that you can rub shoulders with such an amazing guy. If Italy had Antinori, Torres, or Spain had Torres, and California had Mondavi, we had Duimpie Bayly. And I pay tribute to him, so thank you.
That's some pretty heady company, not for Duimpie Bayly to be in, I think, but for Mondavi & Co. to be in. But it very much shows, and it's beautifully put there, Kevin, thank you, just how high a regard the entire wine community not had, but still continues to have for the legend that is Duimpie Bayly. Gary Baumgarten out at Antonie Rupert Weiner. Duimpie was a great wine man and a fun guy. He was more than a legend. We will miss him a lot. Well, that's been made so clear this evening. And Judy Brouwer, always a gentleman and always such a mischievous glint in his eye, a real legend. We're hearing the same words come through over and over again, and quite rightly so. DeWet, if I can get your perspective, you and Duimpie, quite different generations, very far apart in years, and yet clearly a very strong connection, and you two had become particularly close friends.
Yeah, Dan, thank you. It's still not. It's surreal to think that he's not going to give me a call tomorrow or will attend the same meeting or it's just he was so part of my life, and everybody else, as the other guys have said. He would joke fondly that because we went to the same residence at the University of Stellenbosch, and as Emile alluded to, he left quite early in his university career from the residency. But Duimpie would joke very fondly, and he said that we attended a sitter at the same time, but he had too much to drink, and that's why he was slightly more mature than myself. So we had my path crossed with Duimpie about 21 years ago when I started in the wine industry, and my boss at that stage was Chris Roux, the cellar master or the manager at Waarmakers Valley. He was also involved with the Pinotage Association, and basically that's how I learned about Duimpie Bayly. And ever since we shared the same passion of Pinotage and wine, and we chatted on a weekly basis. I joined Neertlingshof in 2003, and of course, Duimpie Bayly is regarded as the mayor of Flottenburg, the area where Neertlingshof is situated in. And we just had so much fun. I mean, so many stories, as everybody else has said. But I think to me is the fact that I could really see that this is somebody that can enjoy life, that can enjoy life with a smile, that can enjoy good wine, but always building up the industry and share his knowledge with youngsters and with everybody involved in the wine industry. So yeah, for me that's just amazing. And as Emile and everybody else said, I don't think he'll be replaced. We will search hard for another Duimpie Bayly in the world wine arena. But on a more lighter note, because I think most of us has cried a lot in the past couple of weeks, but I would like to share, and while I have the opportunity, I would like to share a little story or a story of a very important meeting Beyers, myself, and Duimpie had with Woza, and so. At one of our Pinotage meetings, we decided to really go and talk to Woza because we felt that they were promoting the other varieties more than they should, and they should focus more on Pinotage. So we all dressed up and we had a very important meeting, and we went to see the management of Woza very seriously, and we stepped in and we sat down at the table, boardroom table, very serious. But throughout the whole meeting, something wasn't smelling very nice. It was like trying to keep a straight face, but it's really there's a pungent smell in the room. And we had the meeting, we got our message across, and when we stepped out of the room, Duimpie Bayly looked at his shoes and he said, "Whoa!" And I can't repeat all the words. He said, "Whoa! I stepped into Honeycock." So that was Duimpie Bayly. Everybody just broke into laughter, and he had this grin that he always had, and that to me is just typical Duimpie Bayly, and I'll miss that. I'll miss all the jokes, but we have so many fond memories. So for me, that is in a nutshell what he was about: sincere, enjoy life, enjoy wine, and always be kind to your next. So this is to you, Duimpie.
A man who struck up so many warm and long-lasting friendships across generations, across different cultures, and had such a marvelous impact. Charles Theron writing in, he was the address of the South African wine industry. It's such a great way of putting it, Charles. It's a lovely turn of phrase. He was the address of the South African wine industry. I love that. Thank you, Charles. And Jannie de Beer, he has left a crater in the South African wine industry, and that is no overstatement at all. DeWet, you preempted my next round of questioning, which was to recall a particular story. That dog story is a beautiful one. Let's get a few others. Neil, you've had some time to think of a story that you can tell publicly. Give us one of your favorite stories of Duimpie Bayly.
No, Dan, I mean, I don't play golf, so I think I missed out on a lot of the of that part of him. I would just like to get back to one thing. As one matures, I get the age of Kevin and Neil, Ellis and Beyers. You tend to find what makes a man that causes the man to attract such respect. And through all the jokes and the chirpiness and this and that, we must just remember that there was a unique leadership quality in Duimpie that just commanded respect. I sat with him on a couple of board meetings and so on, and there were the jokes, as DeWet alluded to the Wozer situation. That was also be funny. But I sat in boards with Duimpie, and every time Duimpie spoke, everybody was still quiet, listened. And at Duimpie's service that was held for Duimpie on the Sunday at Waterford, Piet Beyers, who from the Remgro Group, one of the Stellenbosch corporate icons, who's responsible for huge corporate structures and so forth. When Farmers Winery and Distillers combined to form Distel 20 years ago, Piet was in charge of forming a new board of Distel, of this new corporate Distel. And so Piet selected a couple of names, which he then had to put forward to Jan Scannell, who's the CEO of the new Distel. And Jan Scannell crossed names, as the guys do, and brought in other names. And then it went to somebody else. I can't remember whose his name was. And then the draft board went to Johan Rupert, who also scratched us. And Piet said at the service, one could imagine, scratched out certain names and brought in others. And it was a contest. What should the final board look out? And when Piet received the final list of board recommendations, there was only one recommendation, one name that had been recommended that had not been tampered with by all three of the other executives, and that was the name Duimpie Bayly. And that story stuck to me because it proves to me that you had this immense leadership quality without being forceful and too direct, and you just commanded such quiet respect in among the other couple of jokes and stories and so forth. But for me, I would also, and in the piece I wrote about it, going to attend a meeting with Duimpie, and there was some heavy stuff going down, which I was pulled into with Duimpie, forming new organizations, Cape Vintner classification. How could we get a new premium tier for the South African wine industry? And we'd arrive at, for example, Dani DeWet's place in DeWetshof, and the meeting was in the boardroom, and all these hotshots from the industry were there, sitting and tied up and suited. And it would be 9:30, 10 o'clock, and one of the assistants would arrive to ask what the tea requests were. And I'd never forget Duimpie's mischievous looking at the host, which would be, in that instance, Dani DeWet, and smiling at him and getting that naughty glint in his eye, saying, come on, we're in the wine industry. I'm sure we can do better than tea. And within 15 minutes, Chardonnay was laid out, or sparkling wine and so on. And there people were forming serious associations and making huge decisions in the wine industry around the product that's caused us to be in the industry we love, and that is wine. And that's why we love Duimpie Bayly.
Some terrific recollections there. Let's try and get some similar ones. Mr. Truter, have you got a story suitable for public consumption that ranks amongst your favorites in your adventures with Duimpie?
Thanks, Dan. I've got a few. Listening to Emile now, one thing about Duimpie that always struck me was his honesty. If you talked to Duimpie about something, he would agree or disagree immediately. So you knew where you stood with Duimpie immediately. That's not a story, but that's part of Duimpie. That's been Duimpie, and that's, I think, why he was so loved. He summed the situation up immediately, and you knew the boundaries of Duimpie. And now a few stories. We've ate a few sacks of salt together. So as far as pinotage, we all know he loved pinotage, and he He was part of the progression of Pinotage to where we are this now. But in all wine terms, viticulture terms, there's always things like deurdruk and oorpomp. And eventually Duimpie one day said, no, that's too harsh. You know, in Afrikaans, oorpomp and deurdruk sometimes means things that he think is a bit harsh. If we on the platform somewhere, we must rather speak in French. We must talk pijage or romantage, or and we shouldn't talk any more about if we talk about any wine. He said we shouldn't talk about what noem ou dit I forgot that now, maar as jy praat van konfytagtig, jammy. He said we shouldn't talk about jammy, we must use a French term as far as wine is concerned. So that's one part. If I heard those French terms of jam or whatever, I will always think about Duimpie. But a few other things also, Duimpie always said, when we started the association in 1995, I said, Duimpie, won't you be the chairman of the Pinotage Association? And he said, no. You take it and I'll be the assistant. And in the last few years, we always spoke when we saw Duimpie, we're going to do a movie when Pinotage is 100 years and Duimpie must play the role of Jan van Riebeeck. And he would always, when we told him that, he will say, no, I'll be your assistant, he said. And then after his death, for the first time, I remember what Duimpie said. So I'm now Jan van Riebeeck. So I'm in the chair now of Jan van Riebeeck. And there's thousands of stories that I can tell you about him. But I think the other guys also need a chance to talk about Duimpie.
It's amazing how there's still such a sense of warmth to this man. And there'll be many people watching now who never had the chance to meet Duimpie, knew him fleetingly through media or reading or hearing about him. And yet he conveys such a conviviality still, even though he is sadly no longer with us. Let's go over to Mr. Ellis. Neil, a story or two that really captures your recollection of Duimpie?
Well, I mean, obviously, maybe this one sort of encaptures quite a few things about him. I'll never forget, probably on one of the very first trips that Veritas took abroad. We were in London and we'd set up in some very, very fancy hotel, and whilst we were waiting for the guests, I think the dignitaries had already started arriving, but somebody complained that there was too much Afrikaans spoken behind the tables. And that obviously led to a bit of a heated, let's say the temperature rose in the room. But Duimpie, typically him, wat is ontlont, he had the ability to sort of, just break this thing down. And he told a story about this fellow who came from the Karoo, and in typical Duimpie sort of, let's say in his language, he said there was this fellow standing on Trafalgar Square. And he said, where Buckingham Palace are. And some English gentleman strode past and said, sir, you never end the Queen's English with a verb. He said, okay. Say, where Buckingham Palace are, do us. Now, I mean, that obviously I think you can publish because it's spelled D-U-I-S. And that was the way another Australian friend of ours, who also was greatly influenced by Duimpie, fellow called Jeff Merrill. Now, Jeff Merrill is also one of these larger than life Australian winemakers, and but I mean, he will also tell you that this fellow, Mr. Bayly, had such an influence on what he achieved
I'm not sure there's a better way, Neil, that any of us would want to be remembered than the way you've captured that there. So thank you. That's beautifully, beautifully put. Hopefully, we'll still have you in time for one last question. I see Daryl Balfour is watching, as he does so often, from his 17-story underground cellar on the outskirts of Nelspruit. Daryl Balfour, evening, gents. I was fortunate to have dinner with Duimpie and Ronnie Melk many, many years back. Yes, he was honest, but I do recall him telling Ronnie at a dinner that wine he'd served was not up to standard, as he finishes this next line. The honesty, and Daryl following up there, but not as politely. Duimpie Bayly, just such a wonderful character. Kevin Arnold, give us a Duimpie Bayly story that still has you chuckling.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I guess many of the stories cannot be told tonight, but I'll go back to the early days and the inspiration that I got from Duimpie. I had this amazing job as a student studying wine in Stellenbosch, and I could work at the Stellenbosch Farms Winery during my holidays. And I worked in the famous or infamous Rondavel, and I guess most of my sort of things I learned about the wine industry came from the likes of Ronnie Melk and Duimpie Bayly. And because of that job that I had during the holidays, I would be involved in preparing the wines for the tastings every morning for the wine buying and production teams. And I'll never forget Duimpie. They always wore these white jackets, as Emile alluded to earlier. And when everybody left, Duimpie would come back and tell me, if you want to learn something about wine, make sure you go through all those wines and taste them. With the net result is that often in the afternoons, I wasn't in a position to work in the Rondavel when everybody came after work. But that's the kind of guy he was. He embraced the youth, he embraced everybody, and he never missed anything. He had a keen eye for culture, he had a keen eye for everything revolving around wine. He was Mr. Wine and still remains, I think, in our industry, Mr. Wine of the time.
Again, it's a terrific title, terrific way to be remembered, as he will for so long. DeWet, a story from you before we jump into a final raise of the glass. What's one that you remember with particular fondness?
Yeah, I think the things that I do remember, apart from all the stories, is the wisecracks that he had. He always had a saying, and I learned a couple of them the hard way. He always carried a little pocket diary in which he wrote his appointments and all of these meetings. And he always said when you would ask him to attend a meeting, he would always put ISA after that meeting, if still alive. That stuck to me. He would always mention that he would buy his tomatoes ripe, no green tomatoes, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. And then the one that I learned the hard way around is how to present wine and how to pour wine. I mean, you can study oenology and viticulture as much as you like, but they don't teach you all of the ins and outs of how to pour wine. And Duimpie had a very strong belief that you should always pour wine over the bottle and not under the bottle. And that first time that I did pour wine under the bottle because of the medieval practices that they could actually poison your drink with poison in the ring. So when I poured wine under the bottle, he gave me a smack with the other hand, and I never poured wine any other way than over the bottle. So that's just a couple of the things that I do remember of him. And then, of course, because we share a passion for chickens and cattle and everything on the farm. He was very fond of his cattle and his chickens and his geese, and he had at his small holding he had or his little farm. He'll kill me if I call it a small holding. He had a farm, a proper farm. He looked after all of these animals, and of course his famous bull is named Spyker, and later on my wife and he did a wine together which is called Spyker. So that's always fond memories, but like all the other guys said, so many fond memories that I'll remember, and I do catch myself on a daily basis when you do something and then you just realize that Duimpie would have done it that way, or Duimpie would have said that. So he's still a part of our life, and he will still be a part of our life going forward, even though he's not here. But we'll remember him. So that's always great.
Like collectively, you guys have made that extremely clear. Let's see if we've still got Neil on his phone, if he hasn't lost his battery. Neil, if you are still with us, just very quickly, what's the wine that you'll be opening, the bottle, the perfect bottle that for you would encapsulate your memories of Duimpie, the bottle he'd most love you to drink, the one that you think would be the perfect bottle to open in memory of the great man?
It's in fact the very last bottle he gave me on my birthday earlier this year, and it's a 1978 Zonneblum Cabernet. And in fact, I've got some in my glass, and he had tremendous confidence in his products, and he would probably would have liked to have told me that there's never been a bad bottle. But I can allude to that. I mean, I've never, and I don't think any of us have ever been disappointed by something that he's had his hand in, and it's just I'm just so grateful and so thankful and so blessed that I could have been, let's say, that I was touched by a part of his life.
I get the sense, Neil, that that's exactly the sentiment he'd expressed towards you and to his other friends on the show this evening. I love the fact that he's someone who elicited such genuine warmth and fondness in everybody around him. And that's a great bottle of wine, partly, Neil, because I'm a 1978 vintage, so I think it's a terrific year. But I love the fact that it's the bottle he gave you, and it's such a lovely way of remembering him. Beyers, the same question to you. What's the glass lined up? What do you have, or what would you be drinking in memory of our great guest?
I'm first going to tell a short story. At Cape Wine, we had to pour old wines or old pinotages for the group of American guys that were there, and it was me, DeWet, and Duimpie. And Duimpie somewhere got 259 Lanzeracs, and we opened it, and the one was, I won't say it, the oxidation played a bigger role in that one. And Duimpie, first of all, when we started pouring it, it said, they from far off and they don't know old wines that well. Let's give them the second wine that's not so good. The first one we'll share between the three of us. So I would love to share, say, 59 Lanzerac Pinotage. But one of the wines that I gave 20 out of 20 was a 63 Lanzerac Pinotage, and I know Duimpie was involved in that, and I would love to drink that in honor of Duimpie. And I've got one, not in my glass now, but I'll drink it with some of his best friends in times to come. So I drink this to Duimpie.
I can almost hear the thunderous approval of Duimpie. I think he would absolutely love that, particularly given his very well-established love of Pinotage. Emile Joubert, I lose track watching you on Twitter. You seem to go through 10 to 15 bottles of wine a day as you trawl assorted Portuguese restaurants. Dubious claim around the Cape. What would you be pulling out of that vast Joubert cellar to raise the perfect toast to Mr.
I just want to
Bailey?
I'm sorry, if I may, Kevin spoke about the Rondavel, the infamous Rondavel at Farmer's Winery, and which is literally a little round hut with a thatched roof where big parties were going on. And Duimpie told me that once, Farmer's Winery used to sponsor all kinds of stuff in the old days. I mean, all the corporates had big money, and they sponsored I think it was the Boerland tug of war team or something like that. So the tug of war team arrived at the Rondavel with their rope and their boots and their rugby shorts. And Duimpie said, you guys are not coming in for a drink until you've pulled my winemakers out of the Rondavel. We're going to go into the Rondavel. You're going to stand outside, and you must pull all of us out of the Rondavel. I don't know how many guys in the tug of war team, 9 or 10 or whatever. So anyway, the Oaks went outside. The Boerland guys with their rugby shorts and their boots, and they were stomp, and they pulled and they pulled. They couldn't get these winemakers out of the bloody Rondavel to have a drink. And it happened that Duimpie had popped out of the back window and tied the rope on the oak tree behind the Rondavel. So these guys are pulling against the tree, and I just love that kind of picture. But Dan, if there's one product that I associate with Duimpie, it really is sparkling wine, champagne or a cup classic. It is just something. I don't know. I probably saw him used to see him a lot early in the day, and nothing made his eyes gleam and him lick his lips more than a nice cold glass of sparkling wine. And we actually once drove back from DeWet to Stellenbosch. I had to give him a lift. Before he employed DeWet as his chauffeur, I used to drive Duimpie on long trips, and we drove back from Robertson to Cape Town. And we actually had a bottle of Graham Beck Blanc de Blanc in the car, and I always have a couple of glasses in the car. And sorry if anybody's watching, but it was a great memory driving along the R62 through Rawsonville, through the De Toyslof tunnel with a glass of sparkling wine, which Duimpie was pouring next to me. And Duimpie and sparkling wine, joy, lust for life, great product. And I once said, Duimpie, did you know there are 50 million there are 50 million bubbles in one bottle of sparkling wine? And he said, how the hell do you know that you count every bloody one of them? That was the guy. So definitely a sparkling wine. I shall pop tonight on this cold Cape Town evening.
Like a wine that matches the effervescence of the character of Mr. Duimpie Bayly. Before we go to Kevin, let's nip back to DeWet. The chauffeur, according to Mr. Joubert. DeWet, what are you opening to celebrate this wonderful life?
Yeah, I do. Thanks, Dan. I was employed as his chauffeur. He would always phone me and said, "Listen, we're going that way. I'll sort out the in-flight entertainment. You need to drive." And certainly, as Emile has mentioned, he was very fond of sparkling wine. So on many occasions, we had in-flight entertainment while driving. But I share Neil's story. He gave me last year, and Beyers was at my party as well, and Duimpie was there, and the bottle of wine that he gave me was a 1975, which is my birth year, Zonnebloem Pinotage, which I will open on my birthday, the end of this year, and in honor of Duimpie Bayly. He was very proud of I think all of the Distel products, but especially the Stellenbosch Farmers wine products, the SFW products. So the Zonnebloem 75 Pinotage is the one that I will open by the end of this year on my birthday.
You might not be of an overly religious persuasion, but whatever your view of an afterlife might be, I suggest that it's a place with a smiling South African happily dishing out glasses of vintage pinotage to everybody inside. He'd love that tribute. DeWet. Let's head over to Mr. Arnold. Last one for this evening. Kevin, what's in your glass in tribute to Duimpie?
Yeah, Dan, I think for Duimpie, there's no doubt he evolved and developed so many incredible brands at Stellenbosch Farmers Winery in the 70s and 80s. It would have to be Chateau Libertas. It was a very fond and very dear brand to Duimpie. I'll never forget, again, working as a student, tasting all the blends, going through everything, what had to go into the Chateau Libertas to make it that great wine. I mean, if one thinks about it, it was only later that brands like Eau de Libertas and obviously Zonneblum was there. But Chateau Libertas was very dear to Duimpie, and I would say something like 1978. In those days, not many of the estates were bottling their own wines. So Stellenbosch Farmers Winery had access to incredible Cabernets, Merlots from Stellenbosch. And I think ultimately Cinsault as well. That's what really made Chateau Libertas the wine that Duimpie was very fond of. So yes, Chateau Libertas 1978.
It's an extraordinary tribute to the man that you've all come up with something very different, and yet all of them seem so authentic in the tribute, be it the love of bubbles, the love of pinotage, the love of vintage wine, that Chateau Libertas that remains one of the great South African blends. And I've had some of that 78. Again, my birth year, my wife's birth year, the world's biggest Kevin Arnold fan. We had some together at her birthday a couple of years ago, drinking beautifully. So a great selection of wine across the board for such a great wine man. Peter Ferreira, who's busy watching, the king of bubbles up in Robertson. Such a great story, Emile. I fondly remember Duimpie always called me Pietertjie. Never will forget that and his love for bubbles. And I finish here with a comment that's come in from Yanni de Beer, who commented a little earlier. She says, we're looking forward to a new pinotage release from somebody called Duimpie. So, guys, I'm not sure which one of you is bringing out the Duimpie. Maybe it's a collaborative effort. I think it would be a fabulous, fabulous wine as and when it comes out. It'll be quite a challenge, though, because you've got a bit of a legend to live up to if you do bring out that wine. And I think together all five of you have not just made it clear what a legend he is and was, but you've also given us such a beautiful portrait of a man who had not just an enormous impact on all five of you, but on our South African wine industry. And while we might have said goodbye to him, it is so clear that this legacy lives on, his impact lives on, and the memories live on as well. So to all of you, to Emile, to Beyers, to Neil, to DeWet, to Kevin, thank you so much for being part of the show. Enjoy those wines that you're drinking in tribute. I know that Duimpie will be looking down, chuckling with and remembering all with as much fondness as you recall him. And may those memories only grow fonder. And I look forward to some glasses with all of you in person as we celebrate this great memory. So to all of you, thank you so much for being part of the show this evening. And thank you for some wonderful recollections of a truly special man. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you, Dan. Cheers,
Cheers,
man.
Thanks, Dan.
Cheers.
So there we go, a quintet of particularly esteemed South African wine people, all raising glasses, all remembering wonderful stories, and all paying tribute to the legend that was, and I'd like to think still is, Duimpie Bayly, a South African wine great. Duimpie, if you're looking down upon us, as I suspect you are, thank you for doing so much for South African wine. That is us for Dan Really Likes Wine. We continue a similar theme as we move over to Thursday. Tonight, we said goodbye to Duimpie Bayly. Thursday, we say goodbye to somebody I knew a little better than Duimpie, an old university friend of mine, the wonderful Rob Armstrong, the gentlest giant, who sadly said goodbye to us, a heart attack like Duimpie, but at just the age of 42 a couple of weeks ago, together with a selection of his friends and Gwen, the winemaker at Haute Espoir. We'll also remember him and the legacy he leaves behind, another wonderful man who only had people with good things to say about him. So that's Thursday evening. Please do join us then. Until then, find a great glass of South African wine. Maybe it's some bubbles, maybe it's some pinotage, maybe something a little older. Whatever it is, Duimpie would approve. Raise that glass and say a quiet thank you to someone who had such a great impact on South African wine. Thanks for joining us on Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay. We'll see you again on Thursday evening. Goodbye. To join the Pick n Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shop points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.